Welcome to This Week in Hearing, where listeners find the latest information on all things related to hearing care. And as you know, we look at current developments in politics, legislation, innovative technology, pharmaceuticals, therapeutics, and of course, we're always looking for the latest innovations in practice management. Hello, I'm Bob Traynor, your host for this episode of This Week in Hearing. Today, we have a critical issue that we need to discuss relative to hearing care. And this issue deals with the over-the-counter hearing aid legislation and specifically President Biden's executive order requesting the implementation of this as soon as possible. And today we have our guest, Brandon Sawalich, who is the president and CEO of Starkey Laboratories. Thanks so much for being with us today, Brandon, to discuss this. I know that many of my colleagues may have seen it in hearing review, or they may have heard it talk here and there, but my guess is most of them are seeing their patients all day, and they may not have actually heard what you have to say about this important topic.
Well, thank you for having me, Bob. And I'm like you and many others very passionate about our industry, and I embrace what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world on really spotlighting the importance of hearing healthcare.
You know, if you could give us a little bit of an idea, I understand Starkey has a program called Listen Carefully, and it has a lot to do with the over-the-counter legislation and Biden's executive order and so on. Could you tell us a little about Listen Carefully and maybe how Starkey and yourself really got involved in all those things?
Well, for myself, I've been around the industry most of my life, and as far back as I can remember, and I was never going to get into the hearing aid business. I was going to be an astronaut, but we all have visions and dreams, and sometimes plans work otherwise. And I've been in the industry at Starkey for 28 years. Great industry, great people. And I've learned a lot over those years, a lot of, small industry. So mutual friends and like you and myself, the passion, and really learned a lesson going through the whole OTC over-the-counter discussion in 2015, really 16 and 17, and understanding what people perceived our industry to be. And, kind of fast forward, and there's a lot of information in between 2016 and where we are today. But, Listen Carefully, which is listencarefully.org, really is focused on the information on hearing healthcare. It's not just on OTC, but it's the facts about our industry, because whether it's, manufacturing, associations, go down the list. I know that we can do a better job, all of us, in stepping up and really educating on hearing healthcare solutions and the role of the hearing health professional, because that was my biggest moment over the last 5-6 years, is how lack of knowledge and uneducated, I would say, that we've done on Capitol Hill and with the general public overall on the role of the hearing healthcare professional and what today's technology can do to help hearing. And so it's not to beat or out discuss, I'll say, the narrative that's going on in DC. We have to have our own narrative on the facts.
So are there specific things that hearing healthcare professionals can do to be supportive of the efforts that you and Starkey and others of our colleagues are doing on Capitol Hill?
Absolutely. And it's really here, Listen Carefully is, yes, something that, Starkey initiated. And we started with this site really in July, meaning wanting to do something after President Biden's executive order came out. And then the follow-up the next couple of days on from, I think it was Good Morning America, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, on articles about commoditizing a hearing aid. And we all know it's much more than this. And we had been talking about it as my role as chairman with HIA, HIA's involvement, and everybody has the same intent. So we put together our website with the right facts, and really it's not as branded as Starkey. It's about, again, listen carefully and getting that information out for whether it's consumers, patients, it could be associations, and of course, hearing healthcare professionals could go on and get involved through your local member of Congress and state, because it's not just a federal level where this discussion is being had, it's at the states too. So it's sending letters, it's letting them know who you are and educating them on why the role of the hearing professional is important, from the examination, as we all know, the testing, to the selection, fitting, counseling, and the years of service and care, because it's not just the cost where they look at, everybody uses in the media the $6,000. It's much more than this in what's involved, as we know. So we have to educate, and we have been doing a good job, and everybody has been helping.
I had the opportunity to go to listencarefully.org, which I would highly recommend to colleagues that watch This Week in Hearing, simply because it has some great information in there about what's going on, the kinds of things that not just Starkey, I think, and not just Brandon are doing for our profession, but it's an overall kind of picture of what we do and what's happening in various states and various issues. So consider going to that particular site and see what happens with what you think about it, but I think you'll be very impressed. The other thing is, what are some of the current hearing healthcare issues that are being debated in DC that might be of importance for all of us?
Well, for me and for our industry, and that's what you'll see on Listen Carefully, but also initiatives with HIA, the other manufacturers and associations, where it's about educating and having the conversations with the members of Congress, Senate. I've had several calls with the White House, some staff at the White House, and you've got to just be repetitive, because when you're tired of hearing yourself talk and having these conversations, it's just now maybe sinking in on the reality. There's so many things going on in DC that this is, one of a lot, but it's also explaining to not just the member of Congress or the U.S. Senator, it's also talking to the staff, because it's the DC staff that you want to build that relationship for the long run for all the right reasons, and educating them on hearing healthcare, because some may be around a lot longer than members of Congress. So you have to think big picture. And that was one of my biggest learning lessons in the OTC discussions in 16 and 17 is the audience. And you have different members in the audience that you must build relationships and talk to.
So where do these regulations stand today, Brandon? I'm sorry. Where are we with these at this point in time?
Well, I think with the OTC and your question, what is going on in DC too is, there's several fronts. There's the over-the-counter that's just, in my opinion, it's going to be any day over the next couple of weeks. I do believe that the FDA will issue their ruling and meet the request of President Biden's executive order. And we welcome it, because it has been too long, and others have, startups and, as I say, kind of some bad actors have started taking advantage or manipulating the wording and confusing. Because for us and Starkey, I do a lot of interviews and over the last several years, and people automatically, the media and some, think that we're against, as an industry, over-the-counter hearing aids. It's furthest from the truth, because we're the ones making the products they're trying to make more available. And for us, I'm against doing it for the revenue and the profit, and making that more over the people and the patient satisfaction, because you have to make sure that we protect the patient satisfaction, which then protects the reputation of hearing aids. And we don't want a $50 or $100 PSAP per se, that's called a hearing aid, be confused with what we all know to be better hearing. And there's also the Medicare discussion, as we know, and that's kind of up and down and where that's going to land. But HIA and associations have been united on this front in working with members and educating members in the Senate on if they're going to be expanding Medicare, what's the right way to do it. If we want the people to have access, here's what we feel needs to happen. And then again, having those continued conversations, because if it doesn't happen this time, the conversation is going to come up in the coming years, because hearing healthcare is on the radar, period.
Well, the idea of Medicare with hearing instruments has been a recurring episode for many, many years. I remember it back in the 70s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, and so on. So we have seen this on and on and on. Now, with the climate in Washington at this point in time, there's probably a little more likelihood than there would have been before. However, one of the things that I had a lot of experience with over the years is the stigma of hearing instruments. When I started in the 70s, and a lot of my friends are out there that started about the same time, we remember that you'd have to be half dead before you'd come to an audiologist to get a hearing aid. And of course, it's not quite that bad now, but it's still not like some of the other handicaps and so on. You would think that with everybody having strings hanging out of their ears and all these things these days, that it'd be a lot better. But there's still that reservation among patients that really need to do that. From where you sit in HIA and as a mover and shaker kind of in the industry, where do you see the stigma factor these days?
I think it still exists. There's more people that need what we all provide. As I kind of joke at times, but it's the truth. We engineer, design, manufacture, and deliver a product that really nobody wants, unless they have to, life-changing moment that makes them go and do something about their hearing loss. I think it's getting better. I really do, but it still exists, no doubt. And it's part of that education and us being more vocal. And it starts at, to me, hearing healthcare is community-based. And if you're in your community, you are known as the clinic, the practice that's going to help people with their hearing needs. And then educating the community, but also then the media, because we all see, it just raises the hair up on the back of my neck. It just drives me crazy when I see these pictures of hearing aids that aren't hearing aids. And, it's the big, thick BT and tube, and then the bud in the ear. And it's like, where are these pictures coming from? And whether it is Starkey or any other manufacturer, there's pretty slick looking products. And the best hearing aid is, for the patient, of course, is yes, what they need, but the one that's not seen. And, there's so much great technology out that it really starts with us as a profession. And then, of course, educating and continue to educate in the media, because it's that, that visual that they see in Wall Street Journal, on US, in the USA Today, Good Morning America, but also in the movies, TV, it's the stereotype. What do we all see, right?
The movie things, they seem to find the ugliest thing they can find and put it on grandpa,
right,
or put it on somebody, so that and likely that's there so that so people will know that there's a hearing loss and that kind of thing. But still, it would be nice to notice that maybe there's an impairment there, and then they put on something nobody can see, and then it would be part of the deal. So,
and what's the one thing they always do, right? The hearing aid's whistling in the movie.
Of course, yeah.
Right? And that is 1980s and 90s. It just doesn't happen today. I remember that was the movie Disney Up, right? And the same type of thing. And I could go on. It's just that when people see it, it stays in their mind. And that's the stigma, because you're not going to die from a hearing loss, and people need to have that, fear, desire, obligation. What is that motivation? Fear of losing their job, connected to the family, the pandemic, that's going to move them to do something about it.
It's like the article that we saw from Sarah Sadlowski, where they were talking about the biggest competitor that we all have in clinic is the do nothing patient who has decided, I'm not going to do anything at all. And that could be stigma, could be cost could be this, could be lots of other kinds of variables as well. So what rules would you like to see with all your perspective on the way legislation that has been formed and with HIA as well as being so long in the industry? What kinds of things should there be in those FDA regulations that we're going to see on OTC products?
I think what's important, we talk about the protection and safety of the patient. And I think that goes without saying, no matter what product and channel that is. You don't want to over amplify, but it comes down to, Dr. Roy Sullivan, who we all know has been a lifetime friend. He's always told me, and he's never been afraid to call me up and remind me that the hearing aid is a third of the process. And, for us is people in DC or with the OTC is simplifying an art and a science. And it's the very thought of a do-it-yourself. Some it may work for, but when they say, well, this is only for mild to moderate, well, there is no mild to moderate cholesterol score. So how do people know what is mild to moderate hearing loss? They could try it, depending on the device, but it's going to be about the fitting. We have talked to the FDA numerous times at their request, and they've partnered well with us and others and just collecting input, that the role of the professional, in my opinion, still needs to be involved. If they want to buy something through a different channel per se, go see a professional, make sure it's fit well, because again, it's that reputation of hearing aids patient satisfaction's at 88%, according to the last market track, 10 from HIA. We don't want to go backwards. And then the labeling, package labeling, what is the consumer protection per se and patient protection on these devices, because it's not a consumer electronic. And return policy, proper labeling, go down the list. And then if they're looking at mild to moderate, what is the gain and output? And there's that the consensus paper that came from all the associations that HIA endorsed, kind of providing those guidelines. So I'm optimistic. I think, we'll see what they come out with, and they have a comment period, but I'm optimistic that, good will come from this, and the patient is going to decide at the end of the day.
Patients will decide at the end of the day, and many of them will end up with some of these products, I think. And it really behooves colleagues in practice to develop a program whereby they can actually assist those patients that obtain these OTC products for a certain fee of some kind. And maybe even once they figure out that they're not really what they think they're going to be, they might end up putting something on them that is more appropriate for their particular impairment.
And I think we see it I know with our customers, and you've probably talked to some of your colleagues and others, that they're buying these products online. They think it's the hearing aid, it's a PSAP, whatever it might be. And they're going into practices wanting them to fix it or wanting them to make it better. And, obviously the hearing professional, whether it's a hearing aid specialist or an audiologist, they can't. And it's, again, then the patient, it feels, misled. And that's also why you've seen 17 state attorney generals, which you listen carefully. We've had them outlined, 17 state attorney generals that have come out and warning consumers about the misleading hearing aid advertising that's going on from some of these pop-up and startup companies.
Yeah. Well, in your opinion, why does the hearing professional need to stay involved in this process? And how should we go about doing that? I mean, we kind of alluded to that a little bit, but why and how do we go about supporting the efforts of HIA and those of you that are involved with the DC people?
Well, I think for why stay involved, or why the role of hearing professional is the service and care, right? It's of course the hearing test, and I'm not sold that the online hearing test is the magic bullet for people that are looking for hearing help. We know this.
Neither are too many others, actually.
And it's all about that. We are in a people business. It's the human touch. Whether it is, yes, people don't want to be sold. They want to be helped. If somebody is coming to, whether it is online or practice, they're saying they need hearing help. And then what is that role of the professional that's going to provide that help of solutions for them, and then help them and care and service for that product, that fitting for the years to come. The same can be done with online. I mean, over-the-counter product, it's now visible. It's the marketing from it because of this bill. But you and I both know for the last several decades and well beyond I started in this industry, whether it's catalog sales or whatever, cheap hearing aids have been around. I mean, this isn't respectfully anything that's brand new. It makes for good discussions and making sure it's done right. So, our industry and the patient satisfaction doesn't go off course and backwards. But a hearing professional can offer an over-the-counter product. I mean, again, it's a cheaper solution per se, but it's about access. The whole thing with over-the-counter started with access and affordability. And professionals can hit both of those as it's community-based if they like.
I've been an advocate of practice differentiation by technology and product. Why should somebody go to Best Buy and buy a PSAP or buy a headset or buy something else? They should buy that at the hearing center. And honestly, when you offer these OTC products in your practice, you get to choose which ones are the best ones that you want to offer in your practice. And then you can offer a different program for people. I think, first of all, I want to encourage all of you to look at listencarefully.org, because it does have some fabulous kinds of information there, some things going on in various states by the attorney generals and so on, as well as some other great information that you can use with your patients as well. And certainly want to thank Brandon Sawalich from Starkey Laboratories for being with us. And in his position as president of HIA, as well as kind of looking at the profession, not only from the 10,000 foot level, but also right in the trenches at meetings where we just crossed paths here just a couple of weeks ago. Again, thanks so much for being with us. And with that, I will just say that I'm Bob Traynor, and I've been your host for This Week in Hearing with Brandon Sawalich, President and CEO of Starkey Laboratories.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you having me on. And please, anytime, love to come on and have continued conversations for the greater good of our industry.